Hello and welcome once again to episode 7 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code on our brand new show. My name once again is Dimitri and I'll be your host for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionists Ben
Hey, hey.
and Johnny
Hey everyone.
and Fernando.
Hello, hello.
So since it's that time of year for Apple events, we figured we'd discuss some of the announcements that were made earlier in the week, or last week if you're listening next week. So Johnny, why don't you get us started with how iOS 14 was kind of rushed out the gates as soon as that announcement was made?
Yeah, for sure. So, me, like most other developers, were a bit surprised by Apple's announcement. We thought as we were watching the Apple event that they would maybe release it, next Tuesday, because I think that that's what they've done in the past. Is they've usually released it a week after the actual keynote address and whatnot. Anyway, they decided to go ahead and just release it the next day. I don't think any developer was ready or prepared for that. And it got pretty crazy. I wouldn't say that it was a smooth release at all. It seemed like the day that it came, or the day before it came out, they were releasing the Goldmaster of Xcode. And then I had heard rumors that they released like a second version of the Goldmaster of Xcode because the first version was having issues actually submitting to the App Store. And pretty much the whole day was spent hurrying and trying to prepare our iOS 14 build. And even the next day when we had finally been approved, trying to release it to our users, App Store Connect just constantly gave me saying there was an error on the page and that I should try to release again later. So definitely not the smoothest release. I don't think it was. I think they could have waited a couple of days, especially because the new hardware wasn't even coming out until Friday, I believe. People weren't receiving it until today. So I'm not really sure what the motivation was for releasing it on Wednesday. But yeah, let's not do that again in the future.
It was very strange indeed. And one thing that I kept hearing in Twitter was like, well, you had months to prepare. But the GM dropped like immediately after the presentation, and then you only have like 24 hours to test some issues that are popping up. I think it's a little bit unfair from Apple.
Yeah, because you can say all you want that you had months to prepare because of the betas and stuff, but as we all know, every time a beta comes out, necessarily all kinds of things can change and can make things that didn't work, and things that worked didn't work. And that is true both of the betas and also of the GM build. Between the last beta and the Goldmaster release that's we're all going to use, things can break and you have to, or things can be different and require code changes on your part. So it is I think a little unfair, right, to say that like, well, you had months.
Yeah.
You had months generally speaking, but you also really only have however much time between the last beta and the GM to actually make sure that it's ready.
Yeah, not to mention that I feel like maybe it was kind of an indication that we shouldn't be striving to be there on day one of the OS release, and that rush to get there on day one is something that may be something of the past. Now, I guess we'll see if, like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me kind of thing. If on the next OS release, it's going to be the same situation where it's just a surprise, at which point maybe Apple is admitting that not everyone updates on day one, and they want to stagger it out a bit more as well, not only from the OS point of view, but also the app's point of view. And as long as your app is not necessarily broken, I think that's what they're maybe hoping for. Because in the past, it was always like, we want all these apps to be out there so that way they can show off all the new features that are in the OS. But maybe they don't necessarily want to do that because maybe that caused too many people to jump on iOS 13, and then everyone realized what a dumpster fire that was early on. So maybe they're taking a different strategy of, maybe if we don't make it such that every app has brand new features for iOS 14 on day one, then people will kind of jump in a little slower, and they won't be as disappointed. Like, that's the only devil's advocate point of view that I can take from trying to explain why on earth they decided to do this.
Even if that were true, I mean, at least throw us a bone, right? If you ship the GM one day before the presentation, everyone would be panicking, but at least you get like 2 days notice. Like, because it's just like no zero. We already know that Apple's very tight-lipped, but literally zero communication, and now we're like speculating about this. Well, is it important to be on day one? Is it not important? Blah blah blah. Like, I literally fixed a bug yesterday that apparently stack views now have a background on iOS 14 on the GM. So it used to be that they would ignore the background because they were a type of CA layer, and now they don't. So it's like, okay, whoever's downloading the app I work for on iOS 14 gets all sorts of funky backgrounds because we weren't ready to ship on time.
And there's an example of something that changed between the beta and the GM release, right? So it's like that whole months of preparation thing is not true in that case.
Exactly.
Right? Didn't have you notice.
Yeah, so hopefully not for the next time.
Yeah.
That said, other things that got introduced is Swift 5.3 with iOS 14 and Xcode 12, and there's quite a few new features. So I thought maybe I could go through them quickly, and then we can pick and choose which ones are our favorites. So the first one is kind of a contentional one where we can have multiple trailing closures. And there was a lot of discussion when this was being proposed as far as how we can name those closures so that way everything is easier to parse. And I think the approach that Apple took here was to just go ahead and add this feature that doesn't remove any existing functionality. And in the future, we could rediscuss whether to introduce labels for every trailing closure or not. So for those that don't know, a trailing closure is basically a way of having a little code block that follows a function, and it doesn't look like it's part of the function directly. And that supposedly makes the code a little nicer to look at. But it's purely syntactic sugar at that point, and there's nothing extra there. But this was a problem when there's multiple closures. How do you make that look nice? And up until now is kind of all over the place, but now there's a consistent style that Swift developers can use. So that's one improvement. Another one is multi-pattern catch clauses. So basically you can check for errors, and you can check for multiple patterns of different kinds of errors in a do catch block. And you can just use them consistently like most other features in Swift, like switch statements and things like that. A great new addition is that self is no longer required in many places. So when you do have a closure that captures a struct, for instance, you don't have a reference to anything, so there's no reason to capture self. So there's no reason to acknowledge that you're adding self. So Xcode will no longer bug you about adding self dot to every method or property call inside of closures when it's not entirely necessary. Enums can now be made comparable without you doing additional work. It will just take each case in the order that you place them, and they'll just magically be comparable, which is awesome. I think this works because basically under the hood, enums are transformed into numbers when they're stored in memory. So basically just checks the individual values to see which one comes before the other. But a nice surprise from this is if you have associated values and they also are comparable, it will go ahead and order those appropriately as well. Now, we also have type-based program entry points. So basically, you can specify where the main of your program is, where before you had to have main.swift with a main function. No, in Swift, you didn't have to have a main function. You just had to have a main.swift, and then whatever's in that file is your main function, like in most C-based languages. Now you can tack an @main onto any structure that has a main function itself, and that will be the main entry point. So that'll make like server-based Swift stuff a lot cleaner going forward. We can now have where clauses on like individual functions. You don't have to have an extra extension just for one function where you want to have a where clause for the specific type. So that can just be tacking onto the function. That's really, really neat.
That's nice.
We can have enum cases as protocol implementations, basically. So if you have a protocol that declares you need to have this property, and you have an enum with something named that property, you can say that enum conforms to that protocol, and it will just work, which is really neat. Did set is a bit faster now because it's not always going to reference the old value, so it can be called in place rather than jumping to somewhere else, and it can be bundled inline, which makes things faster. We have a new float 16 type. And then as far as Swift Package Manager goes, there are a bunch of new functionality in there for bundle resources and localization and binary dependencies. And this will make libraries like Firebase a lot easier to use because you won't necessarily need to use CocoaPods to be able to integrate it. Now, we'll see if that's actually going to become the case because I hear they're still working on it. So what are all your thoughts with regard to all of these new additions to Swift?
I know a couple of friends who are probably annoyed about the self change because they really, really liked having like self be explicit. I don't know if that's a thing because you're coming from another language or what. But I remember like having a conversation about that. They're not gonna be pleased.
Well, you can always make it explicit, right? It's the optionality of it.
No, that's wrong.
That's wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, I welcome that change personally. I don't like seeing self everywhere, so I'm happy about that.
That's it. After I learned that key command, I think it was Control Option Command F to just apply all the fixits, I stopped caring because I was like, oh, there's a thing. Command Control Option F, and then it just applies all the self dots to everything, and I'm like, okay, time to move on.
Yeah,
So.
I agree. It's like Ben said, it's a welcome change. And you said something about the where.
Yeah, so on functions, you can put a where and basically say that this generic type is comparable, and that function will only apply in that scenario, and that doesn't need to be as a part of an extension where the generic type is comparable. And again, that's like a code cleanup kind of thing. You had to have an extension just for that, whereas now you can just have it all together and not have as many jumps around, especially when you have nested types. If you had to have an extension for that, then you have to jump all the way out of where you are and have your extension, and that can be kind of distracting to your code and how you put it together.
And speaking of seeing this and having it be a little more concrete, there's a really great website, what'snewinswift.com, and they have a way for you. It's run by Paul Hudson, and so you can actually compare two versions of Swift, and then it will give you kind of the differences. So particularly if you're a visual person, you need like visual feedback on these changes. We'll put that in the show notes, but that's a really good place to kind of check this stuff out.
Yeah,
It's
and I
run by
shamelessly
Paul
copied.
Hudson?
Yeah, he writes the articles on every new feature, and then this basically accumulates those articles and shows you the diff between the versions. So I shamelessly use that to build this list. I'm not going to lie about that because that is an awesome resource.
Yeah.
And it also means you don't need to keep rereading the Swift guide every time there's a new version of Swift. You don't either need to keep up like week by week on what's coming out in the next version of Swift, and you're not even sure if it's actually going to come out because they have a lot of discussion on everything. So this is like the perfect resource.
It's because Two Straws has already done all that work, and it's already turned it into a lovely diff for you. Because I think he might be a clone or something, because I don't know how he gets all this stuff done at once.
Oh,
but
man. Yeah.
That was literally
impressive.
my point. Yeah, it's like it's run by him. How does he do it? It's like, does he have like what's the Harry Potter thing where the clock Hermione
The time
uses?
turner.
Oh,
Time
yeah.
turner. Like,
Time
does he have a
turner.
time turner? Because that's amazing.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's everywhere at once.
All right.
So
well,
Ben,
yeah.
go for
Let's move on to kind of the next big thing that was talked about at the event, which is a little subtle. And if you're not, if you weren't paying attention, or maybe if this is a new event for you, like if you haven't been following Apple until recently, typically how this works is that they do their iPhone event usually first. In the fall, and then other hardware comes out after that. And I think because of COVID and everything else that's going on, they had announced over a month ago that they were going to be delaying the iPhone launch till October. And so we ended up with iPads first instead of iPhones. And what's kind of really interesting about that is that they went ahead and launched the new iPad Air, which is a really cool design. It's taking the iPad Pro design, and most interestingly is now run on an A14 chip, which is their newest generation A series chip, their custom silicon, and in fact is supposedly the very first chip in the world, I believe, to run on a 5 nanometer process from their chip manufacturer TSMC, which is pretty cool. So they're world first in that sense. Was it 11.9 million? Do I have that right? Million transistors, or maybe
Billion, I think.
billion.
I mean,
Yeah.
that was billion.
Yeah, billion. Sorry, I knew that. I knew I was probably off by an order of magnitude, but yeah. So just an insane amount of transistors on a tiny little chip, and it's going to be very performant and interestingly enough. So two things, right? We're seeing this chip premiere before the iPhone, which usually the iPhone is the launch vehicle for this kind of tech. They also kind of downplayed the performance, I think, a little bit because they compared the A14 chip against the A12, which was the last chip that appeared in an iPad Air. But that was not super recently. Since then, they released the A13 Bionic, which is what's in the iPhone 11 series phones, and the iPad Pro, I believe. So a little interesting that they almost were kind of like showing you the differences between the A12 and the A14. Of course, they're going to be a little more impressive because that's a wider amount of time between those two things compared to like the A13 and the A14, which are closer together and therefore won't have as much of a jump. And the thinking behind that is that there might be some extra tricks up the A14 sleeve that they're keeping close to the vest right now because they want to show those off and kind of brag about it when the iPhone 12 comes out. And so we're thinking that we may also see some additional improvements, or we'll know about some of these additional improvements in the A14 chip when the iPhone 12 comes out, because they will take that opportunity to brag about them. So interesting that we're kind of getting it in reverse. And then also, as I was watching the iPad Air portion of the event, sitting there with my iPad Pro that I bought in 2018, I was thinking, why isn't that effectively better than what I currently have? Which in some ways it actually is better, and in some ways not. The cameras on the camera on this one is better than the one on the new one, and there's a few other smaller things that are arguably better, but in general, it seems like going forward, if people ask me for advice on iPads, I'm probably going to say, ask them what they want to use it for, and either tell them get the new iPad, the one that's $329 because it's incredibly capable, or get the iPad Air. I don't think there's going to be much call for the Pro unless you have like a very specific set of things that you want to do that you can only do on the Pro. It's interesting they kind of, in my opinion, shifted like the popular advice from being like get the Pro to no, you should probably get the Air. Plus, you'll save hundreds of dollars when you do so.
One
Do you think
interesting
that-
thing. Go for it.
Go.
Oh, one interesting thing is that the A13 chip never actually made it to any iPad or other device.
Right.
It's only an iPhone chip. So we are seeing an A14, not an A14X or Z
Right.
or anything, an A14, which is probably meant to go in an iPhone,
Yeah.
in the iPad. And we can only assume that it's meeting the thresholds of the iPad Pro, which is a like super powered version of the A12, like on
Right.
its own. So I think maybe they skipped the A13 generation of iPad Pro CPUs, if only to widen that gap even more once the new iPad Pro and ostensibly probably the Mac comes out later this year, because then we're going to see the true power of an A14 chip with many more cores and many more GPU cores. And I assume they can just add more linearly with the amount of power draw and heat consumption that they expect, right?
Right.
So on an iPad with no fan, it's just you just have a giant heat sink of a chassis essentially. You can push it to a certain amount of certain thermal envelope. But then on a Mac where you do have a fan, you can probably push it even further.
Right.
So they can just add more cores in those situations. And because we have no A13 variant to compare it to, this A14 variant can likely blow the A12 like out of the water at that point.
Yeah, I was going to ask something like that. Like, if you guys think that we know that the ARM Macs are coming soon, are they coming with a new iPad Pro?
Oh, like so ARM Max and a new iPad Pro at the same time? Yeah, that's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of that. it does seem pretty clear that in a kind of a very weird set of circumstances, we're seeing not only a preview of the chip that will very likely be in the new iPhone that isn't announced yet, which is strange, and also probably the basic structure of what will be the first ARM Mac chip. So it's very weird to get like a sort of a preview of sorts on hardware that isn't yet announced. At least portions of it. But yeah, that could be. I will say I was surprised. I was not that surprised there was no new iPad Pro because they just revved it in May, so it seems weird that they would then rev it again. But I was surprised and disappointed that they didn't rev the Mini because they last revved it in 2019, and it could certainly use an upgrade. And maybe they're holding that back for the spring or something. I don't know. To go to I would love a Mini that is Pro shaped, so like flat sides, edge to edge screen. And I was gonna say Face ID, but now I'm thinking, Touch ID in the home button in the power button would be great.
Because just to add to that, just what you said, Dimitri, got my gears going. And it's like you could, in theory, I don't know if this pans out or not, but you could, in theory, show like the new iPad Pro, like you said, where you have the chassis being the heatsink and the main heat dissipator. And then above that, like an intro ARM Mac with a fan, and then above that, something like insanely powerful. And then you present it like at the 3 levels of the A14 for like the new generation, I'd say.
I'd say that would make sense. Ben, I was going to say maybe the iPad Mini not being updated kind of confirms an iPhone Mega in the future, where there's just an even larger.
Perhaps. I use an iPad Mini as it's both a drone controlling thing and also like for just like watching videos at night and stuff. So it's definitely not. I certainly don't need one, but like I probably would have. I have a Mini 4, so it's not even the most recent Mini. It's the previous gen, and I could probably find an excuse to buy one, but I guess they're not gonna. I'll save my pennies for the iPhone 12.
Dimitri was thinking iPhone Mega. I was thinking iPad phone.
And you just meet in the middle. Like you guys just come together and you just meet right in the middle.
Yeah.
So Ben touched on Touch ID on the iPad. Fernando, can you tell us a bit more about what's going on there?
Yeah, I think I actually have a question more than a statement about it. Because do you guys think this is a scrambling situation for Apple where they're going back to Touch ID, or was this already planned for the iPads? Because I can see it both ways for sure.
I would say it was planned. Like, I don't think they had nearly enough time to scramble something that would work to Apple's satisfaction.
Yeah.
And the iPad is much less a device where you need to like work with masks in that regard. Like, you're at home with your iPad.
I agree.
So I think that was just because the Face ID stuff is probably still too expensive to just bundle in every device. Of course, they can, but they want to maintain their healthy margins, so that's why they won't. And I would say that Touch ID sensor, although it looks really fancy, is probably not that expensive for them to produce at this point because they are comfortable with that entire manufacturing process.
Okay, so I agree with that. I'll get to the obvious question then. Is the iPhone 12 does it have both Face ID and a Touch ID device? Because let me say that. Because they're probably. Oh no, never mind. I was thinking about the Intel Max. Oh yeah, no, never mind. I was gonna say because they don't use an Intel processor now, so they can use that money to put in the iPhone's never been. Yeah. But yeah, what do you guys think? Does it have both Touch ID and Face ID?
I would say if they can, then definitely, right? The button doesn't take any more space at that point. And it doesn't seem like the power button on recent iPhones did get bigger over time, like longer at least. And I would assume this Touch ID sensor, it doesn't need to see your whole finger. Like you would train it with your whole finger, but then it just needs a little sliver to confirm and triangulate with. So I don't see if there's any technical limitation why there wouldn't be one on the iPhone. And it seems like they knew that Face ID had limitations even before everyone needed to wear masks. like there were some issues with it. I, on a daily basis, need to enter in my password just because Face ID just times out after looking at the ceiling too much and decides it doesn't like my face anymore. So it's like you use your passcode at that point. And I got so used to that when I never used my passcode in the past. So having Touch ID there, along with Face ID, might be the sweet spot where, for most people, it just like you never need to enter a passcode again. And for those that are really security conscious, you might need both. To get in. I think that combination like happens to work really well when we all suddenly need to wear masks. I agree. Not to mention, I would be super excited to see it coming to the watch as well, because I hate typing my passcode on the watch, and unlock your phone to unlock your watch thing never works for me.
Really? But how often are you typing in your password on your watch?
Every morning.
Because when you put it on, you have to.
No. I agree with you. But it's like it's 4 digits, Dimitri. Come on.
4.
Mine is not 4 digits.
It should be at least 6, if not 8.
What?
Yeah, 4 is proven. What? 4 is proven to be not very secure. Like.
But it's your watch. Like you literally, like you don't leave it just like your phone, right?
That's
like
true.
My phone has alphanumeric, like
That's
10
true.
digits, but. I get it. You guys are probably right.
But the other thing that I'm really I would love if that was the case. It seems like flat sides is a pretty strong rumor. So there's room for sort of that style of button to appear on the side of an iPhone. And then the other thing is like for those of us who live in warm climates, this probably isn't as much of a thing. But like for you, Johnny, right in Utah, I mean I don't think it gets like insanely cold there, but it gets cold enough. So like wearing gloves, right, makes Touch ID not as good. Having even just literally having the temperature change so drastically can make your fingerprint not be reliably readable. So that I've heard that as a limitation in places where it's very humid or it rains a lot, like in Orlando where I live. Having your fingers be like sweaty or wet can lead to problems. So then those are like I think clear scenarios where Face ID makes more sense. But at the same time, it's not the case that Face ID is a perfect solution in every scenario either. So to me, the perfect answer is both, right? Give me both, and I can pick one or the other at any given situation. And that so like I'm at a restaurant to do quick takeout to grab my food, and I need to like pull up my order or whatever on my phone. I have my face mask on. I'm putting in my passcode, but if I could just use my finger to unlock there, that'd be great. And then vice versa, like when I'm at home and just don't have a face mask on, I would actually just prefer to just swipe up and just let it read my face and go from there. So I think that would be great. Whether that feels like I could totally believe either of these things being true, where either Apple sees that and sees a clear way to market that as a solution and it's going to be like, this is the greatest thing ever, or I could also see them being like weirdly snobby about it and be like, no, we're only going to give you one or the other per platform.
Yeah, the pros get Face ID and the non-pro iPhones.
Yeah, with like no explanation. And I could totally see either of those being true.
I agree 100%. I have a really dumb question. Have you guys used those gloves that have like capacitive fingertips?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Can you train them on Touch ID?
No.
Yeah.
Because Touch ID is a camera. It's a camera sensor that has no lens. So it looks it looks 1-to-1 to where your finger is. Huh. So rather than look at like a conical viewpoint, which is what a lens does, it looks 1-to-1. So whatever you put on the glass, that's what it sees, like via a camera sensor. So it's just a camera sensor that's cut out like I don't even think it's a circle. I think it's just a square in the circle.
So like, more like a photocopier, like whatever you put on top of it, exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's not like a photocopier where it scans. No. It's just that's the sensor.
Right.
And the pixels are much larger than the sensor in the back of your camera because that one is teeny tiny, and then you have a lens to focus the light on it. So this one is just a 1-to-1 with what's on the glass, and that's all it sees, what's on the glass. Everything else is a blur.
I didn't know that's how it worked. That's cool.
Yeah, and not to draw this topic out too much, but the last comment I have is exactly what Ben said. I want to echo it. Like, I think we're sort of like, it's a given that it's going to come with both Face ID and a Touch ID, but it's Apple. I can totally see them being like, what? No.
Here's a weird curveball for no reason.
Yeah, because if it does, is it like did they backtrack and finally let us have both
Right.
because it's the right thing,
Right.
or because of COVID? Because it's like
Right.
I could see it either way.
Or this is what we were going to do all along, right? Like that's the other famous Apple trick is like this was our plan all along. It's like maybe.
I don't know. Personally, I think the underscreen sensors need to get better, so that way on your iMac you can just put your hand on the screen and it would just scan your. Because we all know there's not enough room in that display bezel to put a Face ID camera for whatever reason. It needs to be as thin as possible. So just put your hand on your screen, get all the fingers aligned. In any case, there were other announcements as well, and these were more closely related to services rather than hardware updates. Johnny, can you tell us a bit more about those?
Yeah, so I'll offer an unpopular opinion. I, for the most part, felt like this event was pretty boring. I, don't at me, but it was
email Fernando.
Email Fernando. Look at this watch that's looked the exact same since Series 4 and has, one big feature that
it
we're
comes
adding,
in
which
red
is cool.
and blue now. That
Okay,
and it has a single band, Johnny. Did you even watch the event?
Sure. So we get a couple of new colors. We get a nice feature that I think people will get really hyped about, but then it's not super useful unless it saves your life. Which
totally forget about it. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we were all excited about the EKG coming to the watch, and we get it and try it day one. We're like, oh, that's a really cool feature. And then when is the last time you've used the EKG? So I don't get me wrong. I believe that the Apple Watch is like saving lives, and that like these features are super important. But there's just not quite enough to get me to upgrade every year. And I don't know if that's what they're going for. It seems like Apple usually tries to like add enough that it's like I'm considering upgrading again. But I feel like the watch has not gotten me to upgrade for. I'm on like a 2 or 3 year cycle when it comes to upgrading the Apple Watch. I also felt like the iPad Air was cool, but it was, they're bragging about how cool this design is. And like Ben said, I'm looking at the iPad that I bought 2 years ago and like, it's exactly the same. Like the camera is the same, but like the iPad Pro has obviously got a lot of features that I prefer, especially like the refresh rate of the screen.
Yep.
That's a game changer right there. So for the most part, I was a bit disenchanted by the event, and so we'll see if hopefully the iPhone event can salvage that. So the thing that came out of this that I was probably the most excited about was the Apple One bundle. So we know that Apple has been releasing a lot of services lately, starting with iCloud and Apple Music, and then following it closely with Apple TV, Apple News Plus, and Apple Arcade. And then they announced Apple Fitness Plus, which is only really useful and available to people who have a Series 3 or above Apple Watch. Mm-hmm. But it was an exciting demo. I just kept thinking of Peloton and how it'll be interesting to see how Apple Fitness Plus affects the revenues of Peloton. And then I guess the culmination of all of this is they've released a ton of different services, and every time they release one, it's like, oh, great, another thing to pay for. And so, why not a bundle? They're kind of changing this market of being able to kind of put all of our subscription services together. Still to be determined on whether the bundle is enough to get me there. Because I personally don't use Apple Arcade or Apple News or Apple Music very much. And so, and even Apple TV is sort of debatable. So I mostly want the iCloud and the Apple Fitness Plus. And I think that bundling the iCloud, I was not expecting that. But once they announced that the iCloud was then going to be part of the bundle, I was like, you maybe got me. So to be determined on whether this is something that I look at, but I think it's a good call by Apple to sort of get us away from like, oh, which ones am I paying for, and forgetting about which ones you're paying for, and instead just having, you've got the full bundle of all of the Apple services, And it provides a lot of great value to a lot of people. So
I think I'm with you there as well, where I don't think I'm going to be getting Apple One, and that's purely because I pay for the full tier of iCloud. I haven't listened to music
Yeah.
in 3 years, like even my own music, just
What?
because I have so much other things going on. I listen to podcasts way more, so I have no value in like Apple Music,
How do you
Apple
code?
TV in silence.
in the
I
quiet,
can't code
in the
with anything.
silence.
Are you being
Silence.
like it's totally silent? I'm working on this.
Yes.
That's so bizarre. Because I no, well, yeah, I'm sorry. That's the opposite of myself because I have to have music as repetitive as possible to get in the mood. If I don't have the music, I get distracted immediately and start going like other directions.
Interesting. So like Apple TV, we have that free year. I was hoping for another free year with the next iPhone that comes out, and maybe I'll give it a try. But I don't think I'll pay for it because I haven't used it in months. So like there's aren't enough of the Apple services that I've bought into already that a $30 per month thing is attractive to me. So I'm curious to see like if either you, Ben, or Fernando are using enough of these services where that's actually a good price point for you to jump in.
Yeah. So we're currently paying so I'm paying for Apple Music for myself, and mostly because I wanted to try and get off of Spotify if possible, and it looks like it's pretty much doable. And in general, I like the Apple Music app better than the Spotify app, mostly because
Whoa.
I agree.
it's more like
Oh,
a
man.
regular iOS app than Spotify is. Um,
Yeah, Spotify sucks, Jenny.
so
Email
Man,
Fernando.
yeah, email Fernando.
I'll stay quiet.
I mean, so the Apple Music app is not perfect by any means. And there's definitely some weird UI and sort of UX in there. But there's also some weird UI and UX in the Spotify app. I mean, that's not, and the fact that it is only dark. I mean, I know some people love only dark mode. They've as soon as dark mode became available, they went to dark mode permanently and never looked back. But my phone goes back and forth day and night. And so I would actually like a Spotify interface that is not dark all the time. Anyway, we're getting like way off point. So I have Apple Music. We also pay for extra iCloud storage, the $3 a month plan, which is I think the 200 gigs. And then we have a free Apple TV Plus year from some hardware purchase I made last year, and that's going to expire relatively soon. And then we did try out Apple Arcade for a couple of months, and then just we're like, there was some fun stuff in there, but it seemed like over the summer anyway, there was like this steady stream of titles coming out, and then it slowed down, and I don't know if that was maybe the summer or if it was like there was they kind of like had amassed a bunch at launch and then were whatever. But anyway, we were just like, so we turned it off. But at this point, with those two things for sure, and we're probably going to go ahead and buy Apple TV Plus because we liked some of the shows that were there. At that point, you kind of like teeter over the edge where you're already paying for enough things that you might as well just go in and essentially, and we're really interested in Fitness Plus. So like if you had that $10 a month, now it's like, well, now we're at like 25. We might as well just pay the $30 a month US for the
Yeah.
Premier one, and then we get everything, which I tried the News Plus thing, like when they gave you the free trial, and I actually found it to be kind of like the Netflix problem where there was way too much content, and I felt completely overwhelmed by like there's 400 magazines, and it's like I know I'm not going to get my money's worth out of this, and so plus I go through kind of bouts where like I'm really into trying to sort of stay connected to the news, and then other times where it makes me angry, and then I'm like I don't look at it for a while. So it's just like as a product, it's just not. I think it wasn't going to give me enough value for the price that it was, and so I let the trial expire, and then I just did it. But if it was just and this is the old argument, right? Like if it's bundled in, I might as well just go ahead and do it. But I wouldn't probably be paying for that, right? Like I'm basically paying for all the other stuff, and there's math, right? That where sort of it works out after so many services. It just makes sense. Like why don't you just get the Premier and then or whatever tier works for you, and then you get a better value where you can literally pay less or at a minimum, you get sort of for the same money, you get more things.
Yep. Johnny, since you introduced the topic, let me put you on the spot. What service could Apple provide that you'd be
Ooh.
like, yeah, I'm in? Because you said the iCloud, oh, maybe you got me. Well, what could they offer to get you? Like, yeah, boom, here it is.
Well, so I pay for the 2 terabytes of iCloud, and so I was taking that into consideration of like, well, I already pay $10 a month, like, and then the Apple Fitness Plus does interest me. If Apple TV Plus can get a little bit more content, I don't know. I would maybe be convinced, but I've watched 1 or 2 shows on Apple TV Plus, and they were good. But it was also like, are they going to make another season of it? Like, I wasn't sure if like the shows that I actually liked were going to like come out with more seasons. And I don't know if Apple TV Plus is like, are they only doing original content, or are they going to try to buy some stuff? But like, if they want to compete with like Netflix and with Hulu, like they've got to get some more content on there, because I feel like it's like, yeah, there's like, well, I don't know, like 8 original shows or something. Like, it's just, I need some more. I need more content to make Apple TV Plus worth it for me. And when they can do that, and at least 3 of these things that are already in this bundle are worth it to me, then I'll go with Apple One. But the Apple TV Plus has got to get some more content to get me there.
They also need to quit calling things Apple TV, because there's way too many things that are called Apple TV, so it's really confusing. But yeah, they are doing a little bit of that, like the Greyhound, the movie with Tom Hanks. That was basically a movie that was being produced and was going to get released in theaters, and then COVID happened, and so they just straight up bought the movie and put it on Apple TV Plus. So they didn't produce that for the
right,
service.
And that's a great movie.
It is.
It's like the only one on there. Like, so it's like once I watch it, it's like,
are you listening, Tim?
Last time I used Apple TV Plus was to watch that movie.
Yeah.
And that was like over a month ago. Like, I need something that's going to keep bringing me back to it to make it worth it to me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For me, I think if the fact that you can get more iCloud space is what will probably make me do it eventually, because you can get an additional 2 terabytes if you ever teeter over. And I am in the 1.5-ish range at the moment with my multi-decade long like photo library. So if that ever gets close to it, I'm just going to go ahead and do it, because I have no other option and I don't want to deal with it. So throw money at the problem, it'll make it go away.
Yeah, the Marco plan. I love it.
Yeah. If there was one thing that Apple could add that I would go ahead and buy it instantly, would be if Apple TV had like anime. That's done. I would happily pay for anime because I love anime. So, I don't watch that much TV.
Apple TV should buy Crunchyroll, and then there you go. You've got your solution.
Done. Yes.
I would
like that's the only reason why.
Because of what Johnny was saying. Like, they probably overproduce an anime series, and then you'd be like, "Wow, this is pretty good," and then, boom, no more content.
We're already used to that.
Yeah, if you watch anime, that's true.
Fair. That's fair. Yeah.
Well, the other thing that I thought that was really interesting that you brought up, Johnny, is like that is a thing. Like that is a real thing. I mean, and not just Apple TV Plus. That's on Netflix. I mean, there's been several series that we've watched on Netflix. We're like, this is great, and then it's like, nothing really happens.
No more.
And then like, oh yeah, we decided we're not going to do that anymore. And it's like, why not? It's great. Meanwhile, they're cranking out season after season of stuff that nobody wants. But that it is interesting. Like in today's sort of streaming based TV consumption world, that it really is not a given that any show that you watch is going to get any more content, no matter really what platform it's on, seemingly. Although I think probably Apple TV is. I mean, I guess to be fair to them, right? Apple TV Plus has only been around since last fall.
Not even a year.
Or not even a year.
Yeah,
right? Like,
and they only have like billions of dollars. So.
No, I'm saying as far as
we're talking trillions.
Yeah, well, but I'm saying as far as like proving themselves that they will produce more content of the same shows, right? Like they haven't been around long enough for them to have not made good on that promise yet. But
yep, I agree.
Talking about billions of dollars.
Yeah,
go for it. So, talking about billions of dollars, this week's episode of Code Completion is brought to you by Super Easy Timer. So, Super Easy Timer is a quick and easy to use timer app for your Mac. It's completely text-based, so you can type in English what you want, 20 minutes or 5 p.m., hit enter, and instantly start a timer. The timer understands English text to create, update, and start a new timer. You can quickly change an active countdown, even while it's still counting down. There are simple keyboard shortcuts to reset or pause, but other than that, no menus, no sliders, just use English to control your timer. So we want to thank Super Easy Timer for sponsoring our show. Search for Super Easy Timer on the Mac App Store today to give it a try. Now that we've gone through our main topic, it's time for Complete the Code, where we quiz our listeners on your knowledge of Swift, Apple, and all things development. Ben, can you take it away?
Sure. So last week we had a question about a Vue class that had a parent and some children. We do have two winners actually for last week's question. So the first winner is David Wright, and he writes, a child's reference back to its parent should be weak or unowned to avoid a potential retain cycle. In this case, it should be weak because the reference to its parent is optional. So something like private set weak var parent Vue, and then the question mark for the optional. John Bash also got it right, and so he writes, in addition to the weakness mentioned, you could also end up with a less explicit cycle where two views are both each other's children and parents. So like Vue 1 adds Vue 2, and then Vue 2 adds Vue 1. And then David writes again, I just noticed the not equal operator on line 11 in the prompt that you see on the screen or in the show notes. This should be replaced with the identity version not equal equal. I don't think it will even compile in the not equal operator in there, since the Vue class does not implement equatable. So those are the answers from last week. This week, that's the prompt at the top of the screen if you're watching, or it'll be the chapter art if you're listening to the podcast later. We've got the code below that you see will output hello Ben. How would you change line 3 so that it inputs hello Dimitri instead? We have a var string called name that is initialized to Dimitri. On line 3, we define a closure with no arguments called introduce, which prints the contents of the name variable. Following the definition of the closure, we change name to be Ben and then call the closure. This code will output hello Ben as it is right now. So how would you change this code? How would you change line 3 specifically so that it outputs hello Dimitri instead? So tweet at us with the Complete the Code hashtag, and if you get it right, we'll give you a shout out in next week's episode.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. So with all that out of the way, it's time for compiler error. So you all know the rules already, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So today's theme is all about SE devices that Apple has introduced over the years. So let's start back in time. So introduced in 1987, the Macintosh SE was a special edition of the 128K Mac that was the first Mac to offer a color display as an option, although limited to 8 bits. So number 2, introduced 2 years later as a processor update for its predecessor, the Macintosh SE30 was unofficially expandable to a whopping 128 megabytes of RAM, an amount that was greater than many future models, and its board and front panel were available as official upgrades for the original Macintosh SE. Number 3, a surprise to many, the SE naming made a comeback in 2016 as the iPhone SE, a special edition of the iPhone 6s, that used the iPhone 5S case and would mark a new tier of low-cost iPhones with up-to-date components. And number 4, available today, the Apple Watch SE follows in the footsteps of the iPhone SE, but rather than use the internals of the flagship Series 6, it is instead closer to a limited variant of the Series 5 with an S5 package on a chip, but without an always-on display and electrocardiogram sensor. So Johnny, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so 3, I'm pretty positive 3 is right. 4, there might be something in there that's just trying to be sneaky.
You've played this game before, I see.
Yes.
Announced today. You should all know this.
Well, this was 2 days ago, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that 4 is true. But then 1 and 2, that was before I was like even born. So I don't even know how to answer those ones. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say that I think 2 has an issue.
Okay. Oh, let's see. So, Fernando, why don't you go next?
The reason I hate this game is because it's always so obvious to me which is the error, and then you say
It's never right.
Yeah, it's never right. I'm never right. I don't think when I say that. But this time, I think it's very obvious that it's number 3. And
Okay,
I also,
so number 3 is the wrong one.
yeah, because I also never know if I should say why, because that gives
You should say
an
why.
advantage.
You're all working against me, so.
Okay, perfect. Then yes. So I mean, the iPhone SE was not a special edition of the iPhone 6s. It didn't have the form factor of the iPhone 6s, but I don't remember. I don't think it was 2016. It was the last generation. It had the form factor of the last generation, which was the 5S. So it was 2007. The iPhone 8 is 3G. 9 is.
This is how we keep track of years nowadays. We just
10
memorize the iPhones and then just go backwards.
7 for S. 12 5. No, definitely it's not 2016. So it's number 3. Final
Okay, and Ben?
All right, so I am almost positive that number 4 is correct because I was listening to ATP, and I'm pretty sure they said exactly what's written on here, basically, that it is a Series 5, basically a Series 5, except it doesn't have always on display, and it doesn't have the EKG sensor, and otherwise is essentially the same thing as a Series 5. So I'm fairly certain that that's correct, and it is called the Apple Watch SE. The first two, if one of those is the incorrect one, we're all going to shame Andrew Matson for not knowing, because he would if he were here, he would definitely know. He is an early Mac connoisseur. Man, that color display thing seems early. 87 seems a little early to have a color display. Although it being limited to 8 bits seems like a reasonable limitation. The number 3 I thought was totally true until Fernando just poked a whole bunch of holes in it, and now I'm not sure anymore. Thanks a lot, Fernando, for like making it even. Because you're right, like some of that sounds like that could be. It is not technically a special edition of the iPhone 6s, but if it was launched alongside it, it is just a special edition phone. It could just be some license that Dimitri's taking with the language, who knows? Or it could be a technicality that he's intentionally put in there to fool us, because this is this game. I'm just going to assume that 3 is right, and that he was trying to throw us off with the early ones because he figured that we wouldn't know, which is true, we don't. But the other one, so 2 years later, processor update 128. Again, it sounds kind of Apple-like to do what is described here. Its board and front panel were available as official upgrades for the original. That's also very weird, but maybe could be true. I'm just going to go with my gut, which is probably wrong, and say that number 1 is incorrect, that I don't think that there was a color display. But I'm almost sure that I'm probably not right.
Okay, so let's start with...
Go.
No, last thoughts, Fernando?
No, keep going.
Okay, so you all agree with number 4, so let's start there. So this is absolutely true. There is no mention as to what SE stands for. It's just the Apple Watch SE. And that brings us to number 3, where we have the iPhone SE. And iPhone SE actually stands for Special Edition in this case. And this is absolutely true, because the iPhone 6s internals were made available in a new phone that was released afterwards in that same model year, but in the next year. So that's why the timing might be a little bit off. I copied the year directly from Wikipedia, so I don't know if it actually matches up or if someone screwed with me on Wikipedia, but I will blame them if that year is wrong. But this one is absolutely true as well. So sorry, Fernando.
No, yeah, I'm looking at Wikipedia, and I would say that even if you got pranked, I would say it's a valid. It's correct.
Well, and your streak is maintained, Fernando. You're still wrong.
Yes.
So this brings us to number 2. So introduced 2 years later as a processor upgrade to its predecessor, the Macintosh SE30 was unofficially expandable to a whopping 128 megabytes of RAM via software. So you actually needed to install an extension, and then you can access even more RAM that was available on the hardware. And that's completely true. And many computers that came after it did not have this capability to address more RAM, which was quite surprising. And now, a fun fact, the SE30 used the Motorola 68K, but it ended in a 30. But at the time, when they had this naming convention, they would always add a little X next to the model name, but having a Macintosh SE X raised some problems that they ignored when they came out with macOS 10. So they went with Macintosh SE30. Now this brings us to number one.
Before you go to that one, I was going to say that Ben is probably right that that's the incorrect one, because the SE, the Macintosh SE, I think it's the 20th anniversary Mac, isn't it? Or is that different?
That's a different Mac. It's really weird looking.
I hate this game. Bye. I'm leaving too. I'll see you guys.
So Johnny is wrong with that one. Because that one is absolutely correct. And it was quite surprising that Apple did sell like an upgrade to the original Macintosh SE, that it was just a board and a front panel, the front panel, so that way you get Macintosh SE30 for the most part.
So Apple.
So this leaves us with number one, and congratulations, Ben. You finally got one right.
I finally got one right.
Now, I would caution you to say that color display is too early, because the Apple II could drive a color display, or one of the variants of the Apple II. Now, unfortunately, the Macintosh SE30 or SE was a not monoscale. It was a black and white, monochromatic. Yeah. So just black and white, no shades of color. You could upgrade the SE30 to a grayscale display, like aftermarket, and it was capable of doing it because it had enough RAM. But the Macintosh SE did not have that capability at all. So congratulations on getting this one right. And not to mention, the SE part did not stand for Special Edition. It stood for System Expansion. So it was wrong on two fronts.
Nice.
So SE is being used in many different ways throughout Apple's tenure over the name.
I love being right for the wrong reasons. That's great.
So that brings us to the end of our show. So as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening live and listening and watching us this week. We'll be streaming every Friday. I don't know what I'm saying. So be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes go live and get released. Be sure to also sign up for a monthly newsletter on our website at codecompletion.io, where we will recap topics we discuss, reveal answers to complete the code, and share even more things we learned between episodes. And most importantly, as a new podcast, please be sure to share this with all your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around all these topics. So once again, I want to give my thanks to Fernando, who is at From Junior to Senior. That's FROMJRTOSR on Twitter. I want to thank Johnny, who is at Johnny D. Hicks. That's I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to screw that up. JOHNNYDHICKS on Twitter. And Ben, who is at Ferris Guy, that is FERROUSGUY on Twitter, for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri, and you can find me at Dimitri Buniol. That's DIMITRIBOUNIOL. And we'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.